Ready to learn the shocking truth about how soldiers trained in ancient Egypt? For thousands of years, the Egyptian army was considered one of the most powerful and invincible. The pharaohs built empires, repelled invasions, and maintained order over vast territories thanks to their warriors. But behind the glitz of golden chariots and the formidable appearance of the infantry was a system that turned yesterday's peasants and craftsmen into elite fighters. This system was built not only on strength, but also on psychology, discipline, and unique training methods honed over centuries. It created not just soldiers, but living weapons loyal to their ruler and their country. The secrets of this training remained hidden in the shadows of pyramids and temples for a long time. We will take a look behind the scenes of history and see how the legendary army of Egypt was actually created. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the simple ability to swim in the Nile could decide the outcome of an entire battle, and why even the most hardened enemies feared Egyptian archers. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret. The transformation into an Egyptian soldier did not begin with physical exercise, but with a complete change of consciousness. A young recruit who came from a village had to forget his past life. His personality was erased in order to create a new one in its place. The personality of a warrior. The first step was alienation from the familiar world. Recruits were taken from their homes and sent to training camps located far from their native places. This severed all social ties and made the army their new family. There they were taught a new language, the language of orders, hierarchy, and unquestioning obedience. Individual desires and opinions no longer mattered. Only the will of the commander and the good of the entire unit existed. The basis of this transformation was the idea of collective identity. Soldiers were taught that they were no longer individuals, but parts of a single, powerful mechanism. The strength of this mechanism depended on the coordinated work of each of its parts. They were instilled with a sense of exclusivity and pride in belonging to the warrior caste. Serving the pharaoh, the living god on earth, was presented as the highest honor and sacred duty. This ideological conditioning created incredibly motivated fighters. They learned to see themselves as defenders of Ma'at, the divine order and justice. Any enemy of Egypt automatically became an enemy of this order, a force of chaos that had to be destroyed. This turned war from a simple conflict into a sacred mission. Recruits were given identical uniforms and equipment, erasing the last external differences between them. This emphasized their new unity and equality in the face of military duty. Origin and wealth no longer mattered. Constant drill and overcoming difficulties together forged the recruits into a true brotherhood in arms. They learned to trust the person standing next to them as they trusted themselves. This bond became the foundation of their strength in battle. The process was harsh but effective. It broke down the old personality so that a new one could be built on its ruins. One that was disciplined, resilient, and utterly devoted. The soldier ceased to be just a man with a weapon. He became the embodiment of the pharaoh's will. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this method of psychological training, which places the collective above the individual? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the legendary endurance of Egyptian warriors was created? The basis of everything was long-distance running under the scorching sun. This exercise not only developed the lungs and leg muscles, but also strengthened the will, teaching the body to work to its limits. Training took place in desert terrain, where the hot sand created additional resistance. Soldiers marched for many kilometers in full gear. This simulated the real conditions of military campaigns, when armies had to cover enormous distances. In addition to running, general strength exercises played a huge role. Soldiers lifted and carried heavy stones and competed in pushing loaded carts. Such training developed the muscle corset necessary for wearing armor and wielding heavy weapons. Another important element was long drill exercises. Standing in formation for many hours and practicing synchronized movements required tremendous static endurance. This trained the body to be disciplined and made it insensitive to fatigue. The training program necessarily included elements of acrobatics and gymnastics. Somersaults, jumps, and flexibility exercises developed agility and coordination. These skills were invaluable in close combat, allowing soldiers to dodge blows and maintain balance. Particular attention was paid to developing the endurance of the arms and shoulder girdle. Soldiers spent hours practicing spear strikes on wooden dummies. This not only honed their technique, but also built up the necessary strength reserves. The daily routine at the training camp was subordinated to one goal: creating the ideal body for war. Rising before dawn, intense training throughout the day, and a short rest. This regime quickly weeded out the physically weak. The soldiers' diet was simple but high in calories to provide the body with energy for strenuous exercise. The diet consisted mainly of bread, beer, vegetables, and dried fish. It was a diet aimed at building muscle mass and maintaining strength. Physical training never stopped, even after the initial course was completed. To stay in shape, soldiers regularly participated in exercises, hunting, and military games. A soldier's body always had to be ready for battle. This comprehensive system of physical development was the foundation on which all other combat skills were built. How do you think modern army training differs from these ancient principles? But this basic training was only the beginning. Are you ready to learn how Egypt's main river became the most unusual training ground? What if I showed you a time machine and we traveled to the banks of the ancient Nile? For the Egyptian army, this river was not just a source of life, but a unique training arena. The ability to swim was a mandatory skill for every warrior, not a privilege. A soldier who could not stay afloat was considered inferior. Military operations often took place near rivers and canals, and the ability to swim across water obstacles gave a huge tactical advantage. Recruits were literally thrown into the water and forced to learn to swim. Training was not limited to simple swimming. Warriors were taught to cross rivers in full gear, holding their shields and weapons above their heads. This required not only strength and endurance, but also excellent coordination. A special part of the training was exercises in crossing the Nile on reed boats and rafts. Soldiers learned to quickly build crossing equipment from materials at hand. This skill allowed them to quickly transfer entire detachments to the other side. Tactical elements were also practiced on the water. Training battles were staged between units on large barges. The soldiers learned to fight in confined spaces and rough waters, as well as to board enemy ships. The Nile was also used to train endurance in an unusual way. Soldiers were forced to swim against the current for certain distances. This was an incredibly difficult exercise that developed strength and perseverance. Logistical skills were also honed on the river. Soldiers learned to load and unload ships with provisions and equipment, distributing weight correctly. The speed of supplying the army during real campaigns depended on this. The water toughened the warriors, teaching them to operate in an unfamiliar and potentially dangerous environment. They learned not to fear the depths and strong currents. This made them more versatile fighters, ready for any conditions. The ability to operate on water was one of the key advantages of the Egyptian army over many of its opponents, especially the nomads from the deserts. The Egyptians turned their main geographical feature into a military trump card. This unique system of water training made their army truly flexible and mobile. What if everything you've been taught about ancient battles is outdated? The basis of the Egyptian infantry was the use of spears and large shields. It was the practice of working together in this tandem that took up most of the training time. Recruits began by learning the correct stance. The shield, usually made of wood and covered with leather, had to be held so that it covered the body from the chin to the knees. This required considerable strength in the left arm and shoulder. The spear, the main offensive weapon, was held in the right hand. Soldiers were taught not to throw it, but to deliver powerful stabbing blows from behind the edge of the shield. Training took place on straw dummies and wooden targets. A key element was training in formation combat. Soldiers lined up in tight rows, creating a wall of shields. Spearheads stuck out from behind this wall like porcupine quills. They practiced synchronized movements forward, backward, and sideways for hours without breaking formation. Any breach in the wall of shields could be fatal for the entire unit. The rhythm of the movement was set by drums and the shouts of the commanders. Special attention was paid to the front row of warriors. They took the brunt of the attack and had to withstand enormous pressure. They were trained to withstand the onslaught by pressing their shields into the ground and creating an impenetrable barrier. The soldiers in the back rows learned to support those in front by pressing their shields against their backs. They also struck with their spears over the heads of their comrades. This created several levels of attack and defense. Training made the soldiers' actions automatic. Each warrior had to know his place in the formation and move as one with his comrades. Individual skill was important, but it was completely subordinate to collective tactics. In addition to defensive actions, offensive maneuvers were also practiced. The formation learned to make a coordinated attack, sweeping away the enemy with its mass and power. The command forward turned the defensive wall into an inexorable steamroller. This tactic required the highest discipline and coordination, which were achieved through endless repetition. How difficult do you think it was to control such a living mechanism in the chaos of battle? But it was not only the spear that made the Pharaoh's army strong. In the next chapter, we will learn about those whom the enemies feared most. The bow was an elite weapon in ancient Egypt, and archers were one of the most important branches of the military. Their training was long and required special qualities: sharp eyesight, a steady hand, and composure. Candidates for archers were selected with particular care. Training began with physical development. A future archer needed to have incredibly strong back, shoulder, and arm muscles. To achieve this, special exercises were used that imitated the tension of the bowstring, but with greater effort. The main weapon was a composite bow. It was a complex and powerful weapon, glued together from several layers of wood, horn, and tendons. Handling it required great strength and special technique. Recruits were taught the correct stance and grip. The body had to be turned sideways to the target, and the bow had to be held firmly but without excessive tension. The accuracy of each shot depended on these basic things. This was followed by long and monotonous practice in drawing the bowstring. The fingers pulling the bowstring were protected by leather rings. The movement had to be smooth and reach the ear or chin to ensure maximum and stable shooting power. Shooting was carried out at stationary targets at different distances, first at close range to hone technique, and then at increasingly greater distances. A good archer had to be able to hit a target at a distance of up to 200 meters with confidence. In addition to single shots, archers were trained to fire volleys as part of a unit. At the command, hundreds of arrows flew into the air simultaneously, raining down on the enemy. This required perfect synchronization and the ability to listen to orders. Training also included shooting at moving targets. For this, special rolling or swinging structures were used. This developed the ability to take the correct lead and react quickly to changes in the situation. The pinnacle of mastery was shooting from chariots. This required an incredible sense of balance and the ability to shoot at full gallop on a bumpy platform. Such archers formed the elite of the Egyptian army. Archer training took several years and never stopped. Even experienced warriors practiced shooting daily so as not to lose their skills. It was their skill that often decided the outcome of battles even before the infantry entered close combat. Are you ready for the shocking truth about close combat in ancient times? Even in the age of spears and arrows, the Egyptian command understood that any battle could turn into hand-to-hand combat. Therefore, every warrior, regardless of his specialization, underwent serious training in wrestling and unarmed combat. The basis of this training was wrestling. This type of martial art was extremely popular in Egypt, not only as a sport, but also as an essential element of army training. Entire textbooks on wrestling with hundreds of images of various techniques have been preserved on the walls of ancient tombs. Soldiers were taught throws, holds, and locks. The goal was not simply to knock the opponent to the ground, but to completely control him. This developed strength, agility, and a sense of balance. Training fights were fierce and took place almost daily. They tempered not only the body, but also the spirit of the warrior. Fighters learned to endure, overcome fatigue, and fight to the end, even without weapons. In addition to classical wrestling, practical techniques were also practiced. Soldiers were taught how to disarm an enemy armed with a knife or club. Painful joint locks and chokeholds were practiced. These skills were especially important when boarding ships, in street fighting, or when storming fortress walls. In confined spaces, where it was impossible to use a spear or sword effectively, the ability to fight became the main argument. The program also included training with short weapons, such as battle axes and daggers. Fighters were taught to deliver quick and accurate strikes at extremely close range. Fencing with these weapons was closely intertwined with wrestling techniques. Wrestling developed specific explosive strength and tenacity, which were useful in any situation. A soldier who had undergone such training was dangerous even with his bare hands. He was ready for any surprises in battle. Regular wrestling competitions within units maintain a competitive spirit. The winners were respected and received rewards from the command. This encouraged soldiers to constantly improve their skills. Thus, hand-to-hand combat training was a comprehensive system, not just a set of techniques. How was order maintained among thousands of such strong and trained men? In the next chapter, we will learn about the iron discipline that was the backbone of the Pharaoh's army. Specialization underwent serious training in wrestling and unarmed combat. The basis of this training was wrestling. This type of martial art was extremely popular in Egypt, not only as a sport, but also as an essential element of army training. Entire textbooks on wrestling with hundreds of images of various techniques have been preserved on the walls of ancient tombs. Soldiers were taught throws, holds, and locks. The goal was not simply to knock the opponent to the ground, but to completely control him. This developed strength, agility, and a sense of balance. Training fights were fierce and took place almost daily. They tempered not only the body, but also the spirit of the warrior. Fighters learned to endure, overcome fatigue, and fight to the end, even without weapons. In addition to classical wrestling, practical techniques were also practiced. Soldiers were taught how to disarm an enemy armed with a knife or club. Painful joint locks and chokeholds were practiced. These skills were especially important when boarding ships, in street fighting, or when storming fortress walls. In confined spaces, where it was impossible to use a spear or sword effectively, the ability to fight became the main argument. The program also included training with short weapons, such as battle axes and daggers. Fighters were taught to deliver quick and accurate strikes at extremely close range. Fencing with these weapons was closely intertwined with wrestling techniques. Wrestling developed specific explosive strength and tenacity, which were useful in any situation. A soldier who had undergone such training was dangerous even with his bare hands. He was ready for any surprises in battle. Regular wrestling competitions within units maintain a competitive spirit. The winners were respected and received rewards from the command. This encouraged soldiers to constantly improve their skills. Thus, hand-to-hand combat training was a comprehensive system, not just a set of techniques. How was order maintained among thousands of such strong and trained men? In the next chapter, we will learn about the iron discipline that was the backbone of the Pharaoh's army. The foundation on which the entire power of the Egyptian army rested was iron discipline. A soldier's life was strictly regulated from dawn to dusk. Any deviation from the established order was severely punished. The day began long before sunrise with a general assembly. Commanders checked the appearance and condition of each warrior's weapons. Sloppiness or carelessness with equipment was considered a serious offense. After the morning inspection, training began, followed by work to maintain the camp in order. The soldiers built their own barracks, repaired fortifications, and cared for their weapons. Labor was an integral part of military service. Meals were also organized by unit. The food was simple but substantial, designed to maintain strength. Conversation during meals was discouraged. Everything was done quickly and on command. The hierarchy was strictly observed. A junior officer could not disobey the orders of a senior officer, even if they seemed illogical to him. The system of subordination was absolute and not subject to discussion. A system of punishments was in place for misdemeanors. Most often, these consisted of extra duties, hard physical labor, or deprivation of part of one's rations. The main purpose of punishment was not to cause suffering, but to instill a sense of responsibility. There was also a system of rewards. For bravery in battle, success in training, or diligent service, soldiers could receive a promotion, additional rations, or even a land grant after completing their service. This created a powerful motivation to serve honestly and bravely. Soldiers lived in barracks in very crowded conditions. This taught them to live collectively, forced them to find common ground and smooth out conflicts. Personal space was minimal. Everything was in plain sight. There was practically no free time. The entire day was scheduled down to the minute. This did not give soldiers time for idle thoughts and maintained constant energy and concentration. Such a strict system turned the army into a perfectly tuned mechanism. Every cog in this mechanism knew its function and performed it without question. It was this organization, and not just the individual strength of the warriors, that made the Egyptian army invincible. Not all soldiers in the Egyptian army were the same. After completing basic training, the most capable warriors were selected for training in special military professions. These elite units often played a key role on the battlefield. The most prestigious and formidable force was the charioteers. The chariot was the ancient equivalent of a tank, fast, maneuverable, and possessing high firepower. It was a great honor to be accepted into this branch of the military. The chariot crew consisted of two people, the driver and the fighter. The driver's training was no less difficult than that of a warrior. He had to perfectly control a pair of horses at high speed, maneuver in the thick of battle, and at the same time provide the fighter with a comfortable platform for shooting. The charioteer fighter was a jack of all trades. He was a master of the bow for long-range combat and the spear or sword for close combat. Training took place at special training grounds that simulated the battlefield. There were also reconnaissance units. They were recruited from the most enduring and observant soldiers. They learned to move silently across any terrain, read tracks, camouflage themselves, and gather information about the enemy while remaining undetected. The army also had its own military engineers. These men were responsible for building fortifications, siege engines such as battering rams and ladders, and constructing bridges. Their training included knowledge of basic mathematics and mechanics. Military scribes formed a special caste. They kept records of personnel, food supplies, weapons, and spoils of war. Without their meticulous work, it would have been impossible to manage a large army. There were also units that specialized in fighting in specific conditions. For example, Nubian mercenaries who grew up in the desert were unmatched fighters in arid terrain. Their skills were used for raids and operations far from the Nile. This system of specialization allowed the Egyptian army to respond flexibly to any threat. The command could use different types of troops depending on the task at hand and the terrain conditions. This gave them a huge advantage over less organized opponents. Each specialized unit had its own tactics and equipment. Their joint actions on the battlefield were coordinated through a system of flag signals and horn sounds. The coordination of these elite units was the key to many resounding victories. Individual training of a warrior was only half the battle. To turn thousands of trained soldiers into a unified army, large-scale tactical exercises and maneuvers were conducted. These exercises honed the interaction between different branches of the military. The maneuvers usually took place in the desert, far from populated areas. Huge masses of troops learned to move across rough terrain while maintaining their battle order. Commanders honed their skills in managing large formations. Entire scenarios of future battles were played out during the exercises. One part of the army played the role of the enemy, attempting to use its supposed tactics. This allowed them to find weaknesses in their formations in advance and work out countermeasures. Particular attention was paid to the interaction between infantry, archers, and chariots. For example, the infantry learned to form a defensive square, inside which archers or damaged chariots could take cover. The chariots practiced flanking maneuvers and attacks on the rear of the simulated enemy. Complex tactical maneuvers, such as feigned retreats, were practiced. Part of the troops pretended to flee in order to lure the enemy into an ambush, where the main forces were already waiting. The success of such a maneuver depended on perfect coordination and timing. Commanders learned to read the battlefield and make quick decisions. They were positioned on high ground, from where they transmitted orders using messengers and signalers. The exercises allowed them to test the effectiveness of the communication system in conditions close to combat. An important part of the maneuvers was the practice of logistics. Supply services learned to quickly set up field camps and organize the delivery of water and food for an army of thousands. Any mistake in supply could lead to the failure of the entire campaign. After each exercise, a detailed debriefing was conducted. Commanders at all levels reported on their actions, and mistakes and shortcomings were identified. This constant process of analysis and correction made the army stronger each time. These large-scale maneuvers were a final exam for the entire army. They demonstrated its real combat readiness and coordination. It was thanks to such exercises in the field of real combat that the Egyptian army acted as a single, crushing mechanism. Soldiers who had gone through the crucible of such exercises were confident not only in themselves, but also in their comrades and commanders. They knew they were part of a powerful and well-organized force. This gave them a huge psychological advantage over the enemy. Weapons and armor were an extension of the warrior's body, and they were treated accordingly. From the very beginning, soldiers were taught that their lives depended directly on the condition of their equipment. Caring for ammunition was as important a duty as combat training. Every evening after training, soldiers were required to clean their weapons. The metal parts of spears, axes, and daggers were thoroughly cleaned of dust and moisture and lubricated with grease to prevent rust. Wooden handles and shafts were checked for cracks. Bows required special care. Composite bows were sensitive to humidity and temperature changes. Archers kept their weapons in special cases and regularly wiped them down and lubricated the bowstring. Leather-covered shields also needed constant attention. The leather was impregnated with oil to prevent it from cracking and to maintain its elasticity. Any damage sustained during training was repaired immediately. The condition of personal armor, if any, was also strictly monitored. Leather or linen armor was checked for tears. The scales on the armor had to be securely fastened. In addition to weapons, soldiers had to take care of their clothes and shoes. Simple loincloths and sandals had to be kept clean and intact at all times. Worn-out shoes could put a warrior out of action faster than an enemy spear. During training exercises and campaigns, equipment inspections were carried out regularly. Officers carefully examined the ammunition of each soldier. Negligent treatment of entrusted property was severely punished. Soldiers were taught not only how to use their equipment, but also how to repair it in the field. Every warrior had to be able to sharpen a blade, repair a belt on a shield, or replace a bowstring. This made the units more self-sufficient. Such reverence for equipment instilled responsibility and neatness in soldiers. They understood that there would be no time for repairs in battle, and that any small detail could be crucial. Weapons had to be ready for battle at any moment. This culture of caring for equipment was part of the overall system of discipline. It taught warriors to value what the state gave them and to always be ready to do their duty. Reliable weapons in the hands of skilled and disciplined fighters, that was the formula for the success of the Egyptian army. We can see that warrior training in ancient Egypt was a comprehensive and multifaceted system. It included not only grueling physical training, but also deep psychological conditioning, tactical training, and the cultivation of iron discipline. Each element of this system was aimed at creating the ideal soldier, resilient, skilled, and absolutely loyal. From multi-kilometer marches through the desert to practicing teamwork on the Nile, from mastering the spear and bow to cultivating a culture of weapon care, all of this was part of a single process. The Egyptian army was strong not only in numbers, but also in the quality of each of its soldiers and the incredible coordination of their actions. It was this training system that allowed the pharaohs to maintain stability and expand the borders of their great civilization for centuries. What other aspects of ancient Egyptian life would you like to explore in our future videos? Suggest the topics that interest you most in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into history.